So every time something like this happens, I feel vindicated in my general misanthropy as well as my general dislike of politicians. Now, a couple of months ago when, Trump was officially elected, I said, if he performs a cock-up or commits severe errors, then we should not restrain ourselves in our criticism. And if need be, we can and should excoriate him. I'm kind of in between right now, excoriation and criticism. I really, anyone who's followed my channel for a number of years knows I'm a big fan of non-interventionism, so I can't help but preach, quote unquote, preach that yet again. It's not as if we don't have good precedent, historical precedent, not just in living memory, but recent memory for the numerous cock-ups in the Middle East. I mean, this is just a given. Let's speak frankly. I'm not going to pull any punches. The Middle East is a shithole. It's got oil. It's filled with useless Muslims. It doesn't do anything for the West apart from the oil. And getting involved does nothing but drag us down further. In my recent talk with Emil, the Kierkegaard, I know I'm not pronouncing his name right anyway, the IQ researcher, he pointed out these immigration issues, for example, how they're sort of a waste of resources. When something like this happens, which could be further escalated, and we don't know what's going to happen exactly, but let's assume it will, in fact, be further escalated. I am, of course, referring to this missile attack in Syria and Trump basically going back on his word about not getting involved in useless wars. Well, you got to think about the waste of resources. Instead of moving towards an advanced civilization, we get bogged down in nonsense like this. And there's a point I'd like to make here that I think a lot of people miss. They don't make this point. It's really, people think in Europe things are pretty bad right now. We just had another truck of pieces, they're beginning to call them, in Sweden. I think 4 people died, a couple of people injured. ISIS is taking credit. And people think it's really bad now. But my biggest concern as a European, as someone who lives in Europe, is every time some nonsense goes on in the Middle East, mostly due to foreign interventionism, mostly due to American interventionism, we get the brunt of it. We have to deal with the nonsense. And I say this as someone who does have nominally American citizenship, but this is irritating beyond all measure, because despite the shitty policies of politicians like Merkel and the rest of them, there wouldn't have been a precedent, or there would not have. It's unlikely that the mass migration would have happened if there hadn't been a decade plus of turmoil in the Middle East, largely due to American intervention. And we got to deal with the fallout. We have to deal with the fallout that is leading to the disintegration of European culture and society, but more generally, the disintegration of the fabric of human civilization, everything that's advanced and beneficial, at least. And what do you think is going to happen now if this is further escalated, which it probably will be, and gets worse? More refugees, more migrants, more immigration, largely unchecked. The low IQ hordes, as it were, making Europe diverse, unnecessarily so. I mean, if the hordes of these people, had an average IQ of 130, and weren't Muslim, I probably wouldn't have an issue with it. I'm not a white nationalist or anything like that, but it's just manifestly not the case. And the point I want to make is, it's really easy to make problems worse. So you got a problem with immigration and integration and Muslims and Islam in Europe, and it's really hard to fix. It's a bit like, let's say a person's gained 30 or 40 kilos in a year. It's going to be bloody hard to get that off. It's possible, but it's very difficult. Quite easy to continue pouring on the kilos. Well, same thing with any problem, particularly political problems. You get a problem like the Muslim hordes, the immigrant hordes, and it's really easy to get worse. I mean, people think, it's pretty bad now. There could be more of them. There will be more of them, especially if that shithole we call the Middle East is further destabilized. And this is my primary reason for supporting non-intervention as a general principle. It doesn't benefit it doesn't really benefit anyone. It benefits a few people, I suppose, I mean, there are all these theories that the Israelis are behind this. I mean, I don't really see how Israel benefits from a really destabilized Middle East. It's not good for them. But if, in as much as, I mean, there's this theory that Kushner pushed Trump to make this decision. I guess it's possible. So maybe it's the whole JQ all over. I don't really know. But I do know that destabilizing the region further will make for poor bedfellows who are going to come in even greater numbers to Europe. And notice the Americans get to avoid this because they have a thing called the Atlantic Ocean separating them, a lot harder. Whereas we're connected with Eurasia by a landmass. And even floating on a boat from Africa northwards isn't that difficult. So yeah, this is my biggest concern regarding this is the continuation of a trend we've been seeing now for years, that things are going to get worse. And whatever dreams or desires I might have or others might have of working towards a truly advanced civilization, where humanity itself is smarter, we're technologically integrated, genetically better off than we are now, well, yeah, you can forget about that. No, instead, we're getting involved in another useless conflict in the Middle East. I said this a long time ago, and I'll say it again. I have no problems with Muslims killing each other in their own countries. In fact, it's good, because the fewer Muslims in the world, the better, generally speaking. My problem is when we get involved, and people... blowback, that's a term you'll hear often. It was coined by the CIA, I think in the 50s, with regards to a Middle Eastern intervention, or, well, I think it was a Persian intervention when they got rid of Mossadegh. And then late Chalmers Johnson, an economist and historian, popularized the term in the early 2000s, and so we have blowback. Blowback. If we know that Muslims, on the whole, tend to be violent, react poorly to quote-unquote invasion, why are we doing more of it? It just doesn't make sense. And once again, this testifies to the stupidity of humanity, or at least politicians. And there's another issue here that keeps on cropping up. I saw it even in local German newspapers. The issue of this little girl who's talking about all she wants is for the little children to be able to play and blah, blah, blah. I mean, who cares? Who cares about these people at this stage of the game? I think as a civilization, Western civilization, and the technologically advanced civilization more specifically, but specifically Western civilization, we're beginning to pay a price for being overly concerned about people that are not concerned about us, number one, or civilizational progress in a more general sense. But it doesn't serve any interest. In fact, it'd be better if we left these people to their own devices and worked towards our technocracy, or whatever you want to call it, advancing civilization. I don't say any of this for reasons of nationalism or, white identitarianism or anything like that. I just know that importing low IQ hordes of primarily Muslims isn't good for advancing civilization and turning it into a technologically integrated and genetically improved place to be, which is my main interest. That's why I had Emil on to talk about things like IQ and other things. But instead, we see people's sympathies towards the poor children. There have always been poor children. There's always been suffering, but there is a limitation in the resources we can expend on these things. But I don't know how far this is going to escalate, and I don't know who's pushing Trump's buttons. I don't really think Trump's terribly bright, to be honest. I thought he was better than Clinton. Maybe I was wrong. Mind you, he's reneging effectively on a lot of the promises he made, or at least the implications of the promises he made, stating such as things like, we're not get involved in these wars, and we're going to work on domestic stuff. Is he trying to flex his muscle, show the world that he is muscular in a political sense? Is he being manipulated? Possibly. I mean, we see a lot of these politicians that had traditionally been against him, like McCain and the rest of them, basically singing his high praises. The warhawks, as it were, the neocons, whatever term you want to use. But as I said, my biggest concern is the fact that the rest of us who live in Europe are going to have to deal with the consequences. There won't be a mass immigration to the United States, if only because there's a huge ocean separating the United States from these countries. No such ocean exists in Europe. And rest assured, particularly after the election of, the non-election of Geert Wilders, voting for the moderates, or the left, basically, that the politicians won't have the balls to do anything about immigration. Maybe they'll be a bit more hesitant, maybe. But if shit hits the fan, rest assured we're going to be getting more and more of these people. And it's funny that coincidentally, in the day I planned on just talking about this, and I don't really find this subject matter particularly interesting at all. It's pretty insipid, but it's kind of necessary. I was chatting with I guess you could call him an online gaming colleague of mine in France. It's one of the few opportunities I get to speak French on occasion. And we're talking about the laïcité, or the secular nature of the French Constitution, and how of all the groups in France, only one group refuses to submit to it. The Christians, the Buddhists, the Jews, all of them, they in the public sphere, they don't wear their religious attire or symbols. But the Muslims, they're an exception. And as far as the mythology of no-go zones, he was telling me he lives in Tours, which is a middle-sized city, kind of in the middle of France. And he told me there's a no-go zone. And I said, well, the mainstream media claims this is a myth. I said, oh, no. Nobody goes there. The police don't go there. Restaurants, pizza places, they don't deliver there. So, well, why don't they go there? Because they'll get stoned. Oh, okay. In France. We've all heard about the no-go zones, but presumably, and I've heard reports from other cities, places like Marseille, regardless. Marseille is totally lost. That they just abound. And I remember last time I lived in France was eons ago, the early 2000s, and there was problems with dog shit on the streets. I'm presumably those problems continue to exist, but I mean, the nature of these problems, it's gotten really bad. And the funny thing is, he's what I would call a normie. He's a good guy, but he's a normie. It's unlikely he'll vote for Le Pen. But he doesn't like the Islamification of France. I don't think most French people do. Arguably, you could say it's it's in its most advanced stage in France because of the history of North Africa and what have you. But this doesn't bode well. And I think the most important thing we can do, the powerless masses, whether we have a media outlet or not, such as YouTube, is to call Trump out on his bullshit. Which is to say, Trump is not a sacred cow. If he fucks up, and he has fucked up here, you got to call him out for it. This is bullshit. This is not non-interventionism. This isn't promoting quote-unquote American interests, whatever that means. This is, I don't know, just playing politics as usual. And whether he's being manipulated or not, or just thought he'd flex his muscles. Apparently, he'd given fair warning to Putin. So, yeah, I mean, there shouldn't be too much tension between Russia and the United States. But let's be honest and call a spade a spade. The Middle East is a shithole. The people there are, frankly speaking, not worth dealing with. And we don't really have any business getting involved there. Let them kill them. Let them kill each other. Just let them sort their problems out by themselves, frankly speaking. I, for one, am tired of our politics and policies and politicians getting Western countries involved there. No lessons are ever reaped from history, or so it seems, right? I mean, look at Afghanistan and the issues that the British had with it back in the day. And then even 2 millennia prior with Alexander the Great. But anyone learn a lesson there? Nope. Same thing with Iraq, which is largely a British creation. Learn a lesson there? Nope. And it's funny, on the note of people not remembering history, before they were born or what. I mean, Iraq, the latest Afghanistan. This is recent memory. This isn't, 30 years ago. I'm a bit nonplussed about how we could possibly think this is a good idea. We, as in the American government, the American, think it's a good idea to get involved. I don't really have much more to say about this, other than it's probably going to get worse and it's going to be disastrous for Europe. And if we're lucky, people will silently vote for people like Le Pen. And I was talking to the French guy about it. I said, you know, I know in France Le Pen is considered far right, but if you think she's far right, well, wait another decade or two and you're going to get someone who's going to be saying, you know, vive le socialisme national, you know, long live National Socialism or what have you. You're going to get that version of stuff, possibly. That's my concern, among many others. But as usual, the politicians drag everyone else into it because we're going to have to deal with the fallout. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. Trump is idiotic on his part, and he's doing a disservice to the people who voted for him. Anyway, I have another video planned in the next day or two that is going to go into the origins, historical origins and development of monotheism as it relates to immigration and integration. And it should be pretty interesting. I think more interesting than this. However, this needed to be talked about, at least briefly as I can do things, which is generally not that great. Everyone, thanks for tuning in. I will check you out in the next video, hopefully more interesting history of religion, a bit of that, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.